You are all set.
Okay, and it's about that time. Welcome, everybody. I am so excited to welcome you to the first series of webinars that are designed for us by us. We know that student affairs folks are some of the hardest working people in the student SUNY system, and we wanted to give you an opportunity to catch your breath, learn something new, and re-energize. So before we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsors because, of course, we have sponsors, the SUNY and New York State Student Success Center. And I also want to give a special shout out to the Center for Professional Development, who is coordinating all the logistics for this series. Because trust me, the crew that I'm working with, we wouldn't have been able to manage the logistics of this. And also know, you guys, and I don't know how many people know Jennifer Miller, who works for the Student Success Center, but she is really, really a champion of the community college student affairs folks and has been very, very supportive of this series. She can't be with us today, but she'll be with us in the future. And I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to the crew who helped put our whole series together. Dr. Shalitha Williams from Genesee, Dr. Corey Campbell from Jefferson, Dr. Scott Schuhart from Onondaga, and Dr. Helen Brewer from Rockland, all Chief Student Affairs Officers, and we take great pride in supporting our student affairs professionals. So without further ado, let's get into this. What can student affairs people learn from corporate America? What can we learn? And who's going to share his thoughts with us today? Dr. Robert Talbert, who is a faculty member, a teaching faculty member. So this is going to be interesting. A teaching faculty member that we have allowed to come into our circle and look behind our curtain to talk to us about his experiences and what he thinks the student affairs profession can learn from corporate America. Surely you're going to be pretty curious about what a teaching faculty member can share with us, but he has an amazing story. And the way I found him, I just happened to be reading an article, happened to be his article about what higher education can learn from the business world, where he was an intern at Steelcase, and Steelcase Furniture is one of my favorite companies. And so he will be sharing with us his thoughts, but let me tell you a little bit about him. He's a professor of mathematics. So he's not an ordinary faculty member that's coming to us. He's a mathematician. Okay. He currently teaches at Grand Valley State University in Allendale, Michigan. They should be a little colder than we are. He got his PhD in math from Vandy in 1997, and he's been with Grand Valley State since 2001. In addition to teaching courses ranging from pre-calc to abstract algebra. So he's a real mathematician, you guys. He is a writer and researcher on teaching and learning issues, including flipped learning and mastery of grading, which is incredibly important for all of higher ed right now as we try to make our way through this COVID environment. He wrote a book on flipped learning, a guide for higher education faculty, as well as has done quite a few articles on teaching and learning. In 2017 and 18, that's when he was a scholar in residence at Steelcase, where he worked with Steelcase Education and the Workspace Futures Group on projects related to active learning in the classroom. In 2019 and 2020, he served as the chair of the math department and led the faculty through the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. He currently teaches full-time. He coordinates the math department's online and hybrid courses, and has actually also found time to work on his next book, which should be out next year. He wants us to know that he lives 20 minutes from the beach near Lake Michigan with his wife and 3 teenage kids, and most importantly, his cats. Yay. And so let's give our faculty in residence, our teaching faculty in residence, a great student affairs welcome, and I will turn it over to you, Dr. Talbert. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Carol. Thank you for that great introduction. I had to laugh a second ago because when you said pre-calc, the auto transcriber gave that as people freak out. And I thought I'm going to need to talk to the Zoom people about the attitude adjustment we may need to have about the math
But that
transcriptions.
was true, though.
No, no,
I
no,
was just
we're working on it.
Freudian.
We're working on it. Okay. Get it. So anyway, hey everybody, and welcome. Greetings from the western side of the state of Michigan, where I'm located right now. And it's been cold, but it's kind of nice outside. I kind of feel what Carol is saying. Spring is coming on. Beautiful sunny day outside today here. A little chilly though. It's great to be with you, and I'm so glad that you all invited me to come in. I want to thank first of all Carol and Jen and all the other rest of the team who are involved in putting this series of webinars together. This, I think, is the first time I have ever really sat down with a group of just student affairs people to just talk about what's going on and talk about how we can make all this stuff better. And I didn't realize it was such a secretive group. I mean, there's talk about a curtain and being let in behind. So if it's that secret, I wouldn't have known about it, right? So you must be doing something right. Anyway, it's true that you're among the hardest working people in all of higher education. And I think we really see that now that we're all having to really put our backs into helping students succeed during this entire last year, even as we're now, I am hopeful, getting to the other side of this pandemic. I'm grateful to be with you today to talk about a subject that I've actually only talked about, excuse me, ever talked about once or twice. Not a lot of people ask me to talk about this, and that's what higher education can learn from the business and the corporate world. So like I said, this is a subject that I've thought a lot about and written a lot about. And so when Carol approached me to come and speak to you all about it, it sort of felt strange that she might be the first person to have done so, because there is a lot for us to learn in higher education, especially now as the pandemic has just thrown out and rewritten all the rules for us. We have friends that are in the private sector who can teach us a lot if we just have the ears to hear it. So what I have planned today for us is not so much a talk as it is sort of a combination of storytelling and trading war stories and brainstorming about what we're sharing. So I'm going to share some of my experiences that led to this experience that I'm going to kind of use as the root of our work today. I'm going to ask you to share some of your stories and some of your ideas, and we'll be pausing frequently throughout just to think together about just what it is so we can all learn from each other and from our friends outside of higher education. So once again, I just want to reiterate what Jen said earlier. The chat is open for you, and you can use that for questions. There will be people monitoring it. I do want to just pop the link to the slides out there in the chat in case you want it. Everything is there. And otherwise, we're going to be focusing on my slides here. So first, a little bit about myself. My name's Robert. I'm a professor in the mathematics department at Grand Valley State University. We're on the far western side of the state, across from Detroit and near the Grand Rapids metropolitan area. I've been a faculty member at GVSU since 2011. Entered the higher education profession 25 years ago in 1997, almost 25 years ago. And I teach full-time, full course load. I do some administrative work. I do research on, I'm a mathematician, but I do most of my research on undergraduate math education and do a lot of writing about this. So I'm just kind of an ordinary faculty member right now in a lot of ways. I am a former assistant chair and department chair for our quite large department of 40 faculty members. And that will come up a little bit later as we talk about what I learned. And I'm also, most importantly, a dad to 3 wonderful teenagers and 4 cats, all of whom are currently shut out of my room right now. So they might be, you never know what might happen around here. I think it's important to also say who I am not moving forward. I am not a student affairs professional. Okay, so I'm coming to you as someone who does not have your expertise. Of course, I do as an advisor and a former department chair interface with student affairs, and I'm keenly aware of how much work and how much effort and heart you put into what you do. But I'm not one of you, and so I'm interested in just what I can learn from you today as well. I'm also not really an expert on corporate affairs. Until my sabbatical at Steelcase, the extent of my experience with the private sector was working in a donut shop during college to pay the rent. I think you can actually learn quite a lot about that through working in a small donut shop, but I don't pretend to be an expert on how corporations work, although I'm trying to learn all the time. But I do have some experiences that are from a unique perspective I hope I can share with you. And finally, just to, whenever I have spoken about this to private individuals in the past, there's always kind of a concern that I'm going to talk about how great the corporate world is and how we should be running higher education like a business. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to suggest that higher education is a business or should be run like a business. There are certainly some overlap, but fundamentally different set of assumptions, fundamentally different aims. So that's not what I'm going to be about. So just relax if you were worried about that. However, I do think that there's a lot that we can learn from each other. It goes both ways, but especially want to focus, like I said, on what we in higher education can learn from our friends in the private sector. So I'm going to swap some stories with you today and explore three big questions that get at what we can learn from our friends in the private sector. Namely, what makes a workplace culture great? Okay. This is something that I think I know I will try to explain to you is like maybe the biggest thing I saw when my brief stay in industry was about workplace cultures and what makes one great. What can great workplace cultures accomplish? And then finally, how might we learn from other sectors, especially the private sector, the corporate world, as we say, to make our own workplace cultures here in higher education, in whatever sector of higher education we're in, whether faculty or student affairs, better for all of us, including and especially our students. So these three questions and our willingness to answer these I think, are absolutely crucial for moving forward in higher education right now, especially as we begin to emerge from this pandemic. I don't know what the plan is at SUNY Broome, but at GVSU, our plan for the fall and even in our summer classes is to go fully back face to face, quote unquote, back to normal, as they say. I have great reservations about that phrase, back to normal, because I think that the rules have fundamentally shifted. As we're entering into trying to fuse our back to normal with the realities of the world around us, we got to ask these questions and we got to answer them in real and intelligent ways. I don't think it's overstating things to say that higher education is at a crossroads right now, fundamentally. And the decisions, just like my oldest child is 17, the decisions she makes right now puts her on a road for the rest of her life. I think we're kind of in the same position in higher ed. The decisions we make right now put us on a road to relevance or obsolescence, okay? And it's our choice right now, all of us corporately working together or not, to make those decisions and do them right if possible. So with that said, let me open the storytelling here with a little story about my sabbatical year and how it all came about. Okay, so at my university and at most four-year universities, I honestly don't know if this is a thing at community colleges. I hope that it is. Every 7 years, faculty are eligible to take a sabbatical. And this is either a half year or a full year. You can apply for either one, leave of absence. And the intention there is for the faculty member to put significant sustained focus on a single creative project that is going to set the tone for the next 7 years. So many faculty take sabbaticals to do things like write books or conduct intensive research projects that take a lot of immersion. I'm a mathematician, but I don't really do mathematical research. I haven't done math research in many years, nor did I really have any good ideas for what I might do on my sabbatical as my turn to apply for one was rolling around. My first opportunity to apply for one was for the 2017-2018 academic years. Around 2014, 2015, I'm starting to think about, well, what do I want to do once I am eligible for a sabbatical? I was already working on a book, which Carol mentioned, but I was on track to get that done prior to 2017. I didn't plan that out really well, but it did get done. It's published in 2016. My kids were still relatively little at the time. So this is 5 years ago. So they're like, 11 and 8 and so on. And my wife works full time. And so I can't take off and do like a Fulbright scholarship and go overseas somewhere for a year. That wasn't going to work. So I was kind of coming at loggerheads as to think about what would I do on a sabbatical if I had the opportunity to. Now, I do want to say here, to make a confession, by 2016, I was ready to apply for a sabbatical. I was completely burned out on teaching. I love teaching and I love Grand Valley State University, but I'd had some not great experiences in the year or two prior to that. And it was just becoming so much work. I was drained. I was tired, like a lot of faculty today maybe feel. So while a lot of my faculty friends take sabbaticals that look more or less like what they do every day, they will maybe get a visiting position at a local college and go set up shop there and teach one class and then spend the rest of their time doing research. I was looking for a break, like a complete break, not just in terms of time, but in terms of the substance of what I do on a daily basis. I needed something totally different. I wanted a moonshot, like something I would never do during the ordinary academic year. And I wanted a full year for it. I wanted to take the 9-month academic year and the summer after that and the summer before that to just completely disengage from teaching. It was that far gone. And so I decided it's got to be all or nothing for me with a sabbatical. But what was I going to do? I just couldn't come up with any ideas, but that's where Steelcase came in. So in case you aren't familiar with Steelcase, it's a global corporation, offices all over the world in Germany, Mexico, Canada, and Europe and Africa. But it's headquartered right here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I currently live. And you know, like Carol knows, the company for selling these modern, very high-end office furniture like you'd see in corporate offices or boardrooms. Now, I'm sitting on a Steelcase chair right now. It's my prized possession. And it is worth every penny, I tell you. What you may not know about Steelcase is that they don't just do executive office furniture, okay? They also have, they have 3 branches of operations, the executive office furniture branch, but they also they have a branch for medical solutions, like making specialized furniture and architectural solutions for waiting rooms and doctor's offices and things like that. The next time you go into a doctor's office and you just hate the chairs that are in there, that's a market niche for Steelcase. And very especially what pertains to me today is they have a robust and very active and productive educational arm that focuses on classrooms that look a little bit like these guys. Okay, so these are classrooms that are specifically designed for active learning and student engagement. Okay, you can see very open spaces, very clean, flexible, functional furniture that's specifically designed for active student engagement. So keep your eyes on those, and back up to 2011. That was my first year at GVSU. I was serving not only as a faculty member, but also as the department's what we call instructional resource coordinator. And that involves managing all the department's educational technology assets. These are things like crates of calculators and Chromebooks and software licenses and so on and so forth. So I was tasked by my department chair at the time to look into interactive whiteboards, what the so-called smart boards. Well, a smart board is actually just one kind of, it's a brand of interactive whiteboard. So you know the type, if these whiteboards and you can write on them with special pens, and there's a computer that will register where the pen is, and you can record what you write on the whiteboard. You've probably seen them, maybe a lot of, if you have kids in school, maybe a lot of K-12 schools use these. We were possibly going to get some money to buy some of these. Remember those days when we had money to buy stuff? That's the good times, right? So anyway, the dean was going to throw like a lot of money at us to go get interactive whiteboards, and my department chair tasked me with just go out and do some research on this and come back with a recommendation. So I did some investigating about what models are available, and to my surprise, I learned that Steelcase makes these things. Okay, you can actually see it in this top picture here, right here. This is a little Steelcase interactive whiteboard on a cart. You can see the little projector that sits up here. And I was really surprised by that. I thought Steelcase just did tables and chairs. I had no idea that they were involved in digital technology at all. So I was really curious. And so I called up Steelcase just out of the blue and asked to talk to someone who was in charge of this product line. And I ended up speaking with a gentleman named Andrew Kim. Andrew works with what's called the Workspace Futures Group. This is a cross-disciplinary team inside Steelcase that includes educators. They have a master's degree level anthropologist on their team who does human subjects research. And the Workspace Futures Group does research and development for all products inside the Steelcase brand that have to do with emerging models of work environments. That includes things like co-working spaces, conference rooms, and classrooms. Okay, and it turns out that he was very interested in my research too, and we were just down the road from each other. He was interested in flipped learning and hybrid models of instruction, which I was working with at the time and still am. And so we talked and hit it off really well. I came out to Steelcase headquarters to get a tour. He came out to GVSU to observe some of my classes, and we built a really nice relationship. So fast forward up to 2015, and my sabbatical year is coming up, and I know what I want, but I have no idea how to make it happen. So I was sitting here in this is the front entrance to the Grand Valley State University Library. I was sitting right up there in that balcony where the arrow is pointing. Now, this building is a magnificent structure, and I could totally just live there. They even have food there, so there's no problems, right? I was sitting around and I was looking, and you see all those chairs and tables? Guess who makes all the chairs and tables? Every single one of them that went to the GVSU library. That's right, it was Steelcase. And so I was sitting there kind of feeling sorry for myself because I couldn't come up with any sabbatical ideas. And I looked at literally the chair I was sitting on, and it just hit me, maybe I should call up Steelcase. So I floated an email to Andrew and gave him this idea of a year-long residency that I would spend on a sabbatical, doing research, helping them out with their research, conducting workshops on active learning, and just being like the resident faculty, embedded faculty voice there. Because despite the strength of Steelcase's educational arm, they actually did not employ any college faculty or high school faculty at all in there, not current or retired or changed their jobs or anything. They were doing a lot of research, but didn't have the faculty input whatsoever. So it was kind of a weird idea, and it was hard to write a sabbatical proposal about it. Nobody at my university had ever done anything like this before, but Steelcase liked the idea. And eventually, just a long story short, I got approval to do the sabbatical, along with funding from Steelcase to pay for half of my salary to kind of make this a full year deal. And we kicked this thing off in 2017, 2018 academic year. So on Labor Day of 2017, I experienced my first day on the job as the world's most overqualified intern at one of America's most innovative companies. I was never actually employed by Steelcase because that gets really complicated with salary, benefits, taxes. Could I be fired? Or, so they just hired me as an intern and donated money to pay for half my salary. That's kind of how we made it work. And here is where I worked. This is the inside of what's called the Learning and Innovation Center. The corporate headquarters is in a separate building right next door. So as you can see, this is an open working space plan, and people have very strong opinions about open workspace plans, but I really liked it. And this whole area you see in the foreground here, and there's some stuff behind me too, was for Steelcase Education. Where the arrow is pointing was the desk that I hot swapped with Mark, one of the product managers. Mark is 6'5". I am considerably not 6'5". And so we had to use this elevating desk on hydraulic lifts to just trade back and forth between the two of us. That was my home base, but like all Steelcase employees, I could just pick up and take my work wherever I felt like it. And I was allowed to work anywhere on the grounds as long as I wasn't needed elsewhere and could respond to text messages if somebody needed me in place. So the building, you can see kind of in the background, has all these manner of shapes and sizes of enclosed working spaces over here and large spaces over here. And they want employees to use them all because they track the movements in and out of these spaces to do research on them. Now, behind this back wall, you see back in here was this space. You saw that in the first slide here. This is what you see when you walk in. The door is kind of like over here, and you walk up, and there's a cafe area. There's a cafeteria over here behind where this plant is. There are all these little spaces, some non-enclosed spaces for small groups to work with technology. One-on-one spaces, four-on-one spaces, large group spaces, outdoor spaces, kind of behind this glass wall. And more. And that was the working environment. Okay, it felt like walking into a Silicon Valley startup, really, so different from higher education spaces already. So that was where I worked. What did I work on? Well, over the next 9 months, what I tell people that I did, and I did actually do these things, is a couple of things. I worked on research on active learning and active learning classrooms, active learning spaces. Steelcase commissioned me to write a comprehensive literature review about everything that is known in the research literature about the effectiveness of active learning classrooms on student learning. And my co-author and I, Anat Moravi, who is an architect, interestingly, and I published this in the journal Helion last year. It's a completely open article, by the way. If you go search this up, Space for Learning and my last name, you'll be able to read it. It's completely free. And I also did some outreach and some consults on kind of what I'm doing right now, like professional development workshops, but not always for faculty. Sometimes it was for faculty, but sometimes I did this with non-faculty, like salespeople. We had this big regional sales conference one day, and all these sales leaders from all over the country came in, and I taught them about active learning. Best audience I've ever had, because these are the people who sell the stuff to the teachers. And so they really need to know how this all works and what the research says, and to sound intelligent when they're talking with faculty. So that was kind of what I did. I did a lot of other smaller things. I was always on call to help people out when needed, to help Steelcase do their work. That was the official sabbatical. But very early in this process, I discovered that I was being pulled towards something I never really intended to work with at Steelcase. And that's where today's session is coming from. So I ended up calling this the secret sabbatical, because it was like the project within the project, and it was never on anybody's official radar. So what do I mean by this? So I started visiting Steelcase headquarters in 2016 to meet with the Steelcase people to start to hammer out the details of my sabbatical. And immediately upon walking into the building for the very first time, and every other time after that, I noticed something was just very different about this place from my home department at GVSU. While my department's really well known for being innovative and on the cutting edge of teaching mathematics to undergraduates, Steelcase was just on a whole different level in terms of innovation and creative energy. Now, energy is really the right word, I think, for this. You'd walk into this space you see here, and it looks calm, and it was calm, but you could almost see the ideas jumping like electrical arcs from one person to another. Everywhere you look, people were just energized. And it wasn't just the Starbucks that was sold over here at the cafe that was doing the energizing. Everyone was working, and not in like a drone-like way of doing work, but driven and enthusiastic. And there was this light in their eyes that said that whatever it is they're working on really mattered to them. When I walked into this place, I was expecting a cross between like a Dilbert cartoon and The Office, right? But what I got was this vision of what creative intellectual work could really be. And I have seen nothing like it in higher education in 25 years of doing this. And I just immediately wanted to know what's going on with this place and how can we get higher education up to this level. So over the 9 months at Steelcase, I did all the things I said I was going to do, but I also paid a lot of attention and took a ton of notes about what was going on at Steelcase that made working there such an exciting and winsome experience. Okay. So I booked lunch and coffee interviews with the managers, some of the C-suite people, and just picked their brains and asked them questions. I filled up 2 entire 200-page notebooks of just notes on leadership traits and what was happening, what people were saying, what I was observing. I pulled my best Margaret Mead interpretation and just watched, just interpreted what was happening, took field notes, and kept asking myself, how can higher education end up with something similar without becoming a corporation, without giving up its core identity? Here's the main thing I learned, okay? It has to do with culture. Okay? Culture is what makes the difference between a successful organization where people are happy, fully enrolled with what is happening, and an organization where people are uninspired, unhappy, and constantly looking for a way out or thinking about looking for a way out. When I say culture, I'm not referring to like the anthropology definition, like the Mayan culture or something on that grand of a scale, although it's related. What I mean is just simply the values and the beliefs and the norms and the rituals that you experience when you're part of a group. Think of it as the way we do things around here. We've all been part of cultures. We are all currently part of cultures. Some of those experiences have been wonderful and are wonderful. Some of them, frankly, have been abusive and toxic in the past. And I think that's why I feel so drawn to this. This is just such an integral part of the human experience, culture. And it currently is, but I rarely hear us talk about this in higher education. Students have it too, you know this. So I'm going to pause here, with having given you this idea of culture, I'm going to pause here and ask you some questions. So I'd like you to go and open up a browser or take a separate browser tab. Here, we'll copy the link and drop it in the chat to this tool I'm using called Mentimeter. I just click on this, or take your phone out or a tablet that's sitting around and go there and enter in the code that you see there on the screen. I'll put the code in the box too. I'm going to ask you, first of all, I'm going to make sure that we are all set to, I don't think I can copy that. Okay. I'll just type it out by hand, 6511-312-50. 3. You may not see anything there right now because I've got to hop over and activate a poll. There we go. So first of all, let's just calibrate ourselves here. And if you could, you should see, hopefully that's the same code as generating. There we go. You should see 4 GIFs. Just kind of help me make sure that we all can use the tool here. So if you get to this page, pick the GIF that best describes how you're doing today. Do you kind of feel like, just relax, it's all good. You're ready to be done. I wonder if there's coffee. There we go. I'm with my people. I can already tell here. You're wanting the coffee here, or you're just totally over everything. Just kind of quickly tap into one of those GIFs just to make sure that we are sending and receiving information to each other. So as you can see, this is a tool, Mentimeter, that allows me to kind of ask you these interactive polls. And I'm going to do this 2 or 3 times throughout the rest of our session today. Okay. If you do have questions or you're having some technical issues, I'm kind of limited in how I can help you with that, but I will kind of keep an eye on the chat here. Okay. So if you haven't done that, just go ahead and tap or click the one that means the most to you, kind of you feel the most at this point. I don't know which one I am, honestly. I'm always wanting more coffee, but I'm also pretty relaxed. I'm feeling okay today. Okay, so I'm going to ask you a question now about culture. Okay, I want you to think about cultures that you've been a part of. Again, not like ethnic or civilization style cultures, although maybe if you can resonate with that, then please do. But I'm thinking like the place where you work, the place where you go to church, your book club, a class you were a part of one time, a small scale, and I'm especially focused on workplace cultures. Okay. And my question is, I want you to think about good experiences that you've had in cultures. Like when you've been part of a really good culture, one that makes you, I don't know how you define that. I'll leave that up to you, but good, okay, or good experiences within any culture. Come up with 3 words that describe that. And I want you to just type those in. You should now see on your Menti screen, or 3 text boxes, I believe. And just type those in and tell me what are some characteristics of good cultures that you've been a part of. As you do, we're just going to let these roll in and you'll see them kind of pop up here as a word cloud. So I want you to list 3 characteristics of good cultures that you've been a part of. We're just going to let this sit here for a few minutes and see things, or a minute or so, and let things pop up. Characteristics of good cultures that you've been a part of. The more responses we get, the better the data are. Font, this is a word cloud, so the size of the word is proportional to the frequency with which it is given here. So you see a lot of collaboration, fun, integrity, okay. Supportive, support is a big one. Trust, I'm seeing, welcoming, yeah. Humor, a sense of team, okay, collaboration, that kind of goes together. Shared vision, I see that. I see good pay practices. I mean, that's important, right? I mean, you want to know that you're being valued in some ways, in some sense, right? Encouraging, I see a sense of team, engaging, civility, empowerment, shared vision, transparency. Man, transparency is a big, big one, isn't it, these days with the pandemic? Let's let this roll up for maybe 10 or 15 more seconds and just see. Work till 1 p.m. on Fridays. Okay, I'm coming to work with you, or wherever that is. It makes me feel bad that this is going until 2 on a Friday. So, well, people can leave anytime you want. Okay, I have no power to hold you in your seats. Okay, so I see some. You can see, I think, some real coalescing of ideas coming in place. Supportive is one of them. That's very big. Welcoming. That's a place that has integrity. Integrity, of course, means you basically just you do what you say. There's not, as opposed to duplicity. That's the opposite of integrity. It's collaborative. It's friendly, fun, respectful. You can trust each other. It's open. People understand each other. Okay, this is really good. We're going to hang on to this and come back to it. Now I want you to look at the flip side. I want you to think about 3 bad experiences in cultures that you've had a part of, or experiences in bad cultures, whichever one. Some cultures are kind of on a sliding scale, but I think we've all experienced bad cultures. So what are some characteristics of bad cultures that you've been a part of? Okay, just 3 words. We don't need to go into details on this. Because some of these could be truly, really horribly bad, like abusive cultures. I mean, some of us have been a part of those, and some of us, almost all of us, know people, whether we realize it or not, who have been part of those kinds of cultures. Okay, lack of transparency, controlling boss, disrespectful boss. What's the saying? People don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad managers. It's abusive, authoritative management, intolerant, elitist, controlling, toxic, a lack of transparency, bullying. Yeah, that's really unfortunate, isn't it? But it does happen. It really does. Yeah, no room for growth is really is a big one. I think we all, especially among creative types. I think anybody who comes into higher education is at some level like a smart creative. Otherwise, you would be attracted to something else besides education, right? Let's keep this going for maybe 15 more seconds and see what else you can come up with. Stale, that's interesting. Ego, ugh, the worst. As you read through some of these words, are you having flashbacks? I mean, man, I know I am, because I've been part of these as well. Condescending, ugh. This is making me sad. I think we need to stop this. Move on. I want to just say, if we stop here, I want to point out a couple of things. And I've done this exercise before with other groups, and the same thing happens. It's really interesting. Whereas on the bad cultures side of things, you don't see a whole lot of like really big words pop out. Okay, there's a few that come to the top, like controlling, micromanaging. But if you compare that to what we had before, there were some big words that popped out: supportive, fun, trust. It's like all the good cultures seem to have like certain things in common, but the bad cultures kind of all have their own kind of ways of being bad, right? Or if I could just rip off Leo Tolstoy just a little bit and remix the beginning of Anna Karenina, we could say that, sorry, get back to here. We could say that happy colleges are all alike and every unhappy college is unhappy in its own way. Okay. Tolstoy wrote that in Anna Karenina about families. Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. And I think that's really true. And I think that carries over to things that aren't families, but are like places where we work. All the good ones seem to do the same things. All the bad ones violate those good things in all kinds of different ways. And it looks different, but it's all sort of like just the opposite of what the small group of things that all good cultures seem to do. And I think that's really interesting because if we can isolate what those good things are, then maybe we can start to emulate them. Good companies in the private sector have these things. These are like these cultures. They're like the consciousness of the organizations that we work in, work for, and live in. They make or break our experiences with it, and we seek out those experiences too. And by the way, as student affairs people, you should. I'm sure you're aware that students are very keenly alert to culture, right? I'm beginning to think that students don't pick colleges out of academic experiences they might have. They pick it because they're going to belong in a place, right? I mean, I've got teenagers, and look, they're just looking for places they can belong. They'll get their academics one way or the other, but it's very hard to find a culture that really promotes belonging. Okay, and that's what a lot of kids and a lot of grown-ups too, myself included, are looking for. Good companies have it. Steelcase had it. For a time, Google had it. I'm not so sure anymore about Google. Southwest Airlines had it. That mom and pop donut shop where I worked had it in spades. I loved working in that donut shop. Oh, if I could only make $60,000 a year doing it, I would have just stayed there, never gone to graduate school. Plus free donuts, Bad companies lack it, whatever it is, okay? And so do good colleges and bad colleges, okay? So, what are these things? So what makes a good culture here? Well, this is the subject of one of the books that I read as part of the secret sabbatical. Early on in my secret sabbatical, I had a nice connection with a guy who had been at Steelcase for 40 some years, and he was a rock star in the area of management. I never heard of him before because I don't cross in those circles, but he worked just down the way from me. And I met with him, and he just had books. He was just constantly reading. The only thing he seemed to do at Steelcase was read books. I thought, well, that's what I want to do. So I connected with him and said, what's your reading list? What would you like? What should I be reading? This was at the top of his list. Daniel Coyle, called The Culture Code. So in this book, this is exactly what Daniel Coyle does, is he isolates these three aspects of positive cultures that I saw everywhere at Steelcase. And I'd like to unpack those with you now. Okay, so maybe we don't have to do all the work in isolating what those good aspects are. Okay, what are the three common elements to all highly successful and positive cultures? Number one is psychological safety. Okay, this is the idea that it's safe for a person in the culture to be who they are and say what they want to say, within reason, of course. Can you take risks and make connections in the culture you're in? Do you have a sense that you really belong in the culture that you're in? Or on the other hand, when you bring up an idea, do you think it's going to be disrespected? Is the primary goal of the culture you're in to fix blame, like Dilbert's boss here, on the right person? Okay, like the whole point is to find the right person to blame and then go do it. And blaming and shaming are very close relatives to each other, of course. So those questions are what determine psychological safety. Okay, so put simply, you cannot have a positive culture if you don't feel safe to be who you are. And I saw this daily at Steelcase, and back to where I was working. Although I was an outsider for sure, I'm not a salesperson. I'm not a manager. I'm not a designer. I'm not an architect. Like Cindy and Leah here, who are sitting chatting with each other, they're both interior designers, and they're like amazing. They're like brilliant geniuses. I'm not one of those people, but I was only there for 9 months too. But these folks really accepted me in a way that honestly I haven't really felt in many, many years. I think I can count on one hand the number of times in my life and places that I've been where I really felt like part of a tribe, as it were. And this is one of them. They valued me, they accepted me, they value what I brought to the table. So like at Steelcase, I mean, all good cultures communicate the sense of belonging. So every Monday we would have these weekly staff meetings, and you think, oh Lord, staff meetings, not again. But these were great. And we would start with 10 minutes we'd always take 10 minutes, no matter how busy it was, to do show and tell at the beginning. So people would just volunteer what they did over the weekend, what was happening in our lives. And the first 10 minutes of every meeting, every Monday, was show and tell. And often it would go to like half an hour. And if there was business to conduct, we just save it for next week. Okay. It was more important to connect with each other and inculcate a sense of belonging with each other than it was to just get stuff done. Good cultures also value ideas from all the participants. And when it was time to work, time to end the show and tell and get stuff done, anybody with an idea, from the CEO all the way down to us interns. And when I say intern, it was interesting because there were other interns in Steelcase Education, and one of them was one of my students. So we were both kind of on the same level playing field. And that's exactly what good cultures do. They have a very level playing field, a flat organizational structure in some senses, where nobody has special privileges over anybody else. One of the interesting things at Steelcase was that none of the so-called C-suite executives, the CEO, the CIO, the CFO, nobody had offices. Okay. The one thing you do not see in this picture is an office. Nobody had offices except the CEO, Jim Keene, and his office was a plexiglass bubble that literally sat in the middle of the floor. You can't see it in this picture, but it's in another part of the building, but it's similarly just surrounded by people, and everybody could look in and see what he was doing. So in this picture on my work area, you also don't see just behind you here, and there's another desk right behind me there. And who sat there was a gentleman named Sean Corcoran, the global director of product innovation for Steelcase, sat right behind me with no barriers. And so if he had a question for me about flip learning, he'd just flip around and I would flip around and we just talk. There was no privilege, there was no drama. It was just people who wanted to get things done, help their customers, and exchange really cool ideas. So maybe this resonates with you. Okay. So I want you to think about this question here. Okay. So what words or concepts might you use to describe psychological safety in your culture? And when I say your culture, I think I'm referring to student affairs culture. Because I think that student affairs people have a particular culture that you would, when you say, I mean, that kind of describes you. So go to this page here. This should show up on your Menti screen. I think I accidentally went too far ahead a few minutes ago. But what words or concepts would you use to describe this concept of psychological safety where you are? And this, you can type in as much as you want here. It doesn't have to be a word, but take your time. This is just going to roll on through. Sense of belonging, actions, not just words, that promote some more support, prioritizing mental health, transparency, focusing on strengths. That's really interesting. Love to hear more, because I mean, I'm learning from you right now. Okay, it's enough of my stuff. I want to know what student affairs people really think, and I mean that. Let's see if I can get this full screen. There we go. Open communication, conversations, all viewpoints. Okay. Checking in on people. Okay, people are important. I think people are at the center, right? They're supporting people, their ideas without judgment. Okay. Yeah, and rather as a way to brainstorm and develop. So insofar as there is any form of judgment, it's really like iron sharpening iron style judgment. Like you're doing this because you want people to be better, right? Job security, no yelling, for goodness sakes. Honestly, folks, I could turn some of this around on my faculty colleagues, and I'll be real with you. Some of my faculty would have no idea what I'm talking about. It's like, what do you mean I can't yell at my students? Like, guys, you do realize that students can go elsewhere. They don't like what they're getting here. Supportive, approval to make mistakes, trying new things, interesting. Like, we don't like want to make mistakes, I guess, but we want less to be out of any sort of contention for making mistakes, right? We want to at least be in a place where failures are something, you do something with them. You put yourself in a place where you can't fail, you're probably not accomplishing anything. Authenticity, openness, recognizing that we're all human. I think it's very important in this day and age, you know, as we're really feeling our humanity more so than possibly ever. Open dialogue, taking risks, which is somewhat related to failure. Now, this is interesting. Students treating student affairs as less than valuable, or that anyone can do it. Yeah, I think a lot of us faculty are guilty of that. You know, I'll just leave it at that. I would have a really hard time doing student affairs work, just because, you know, I don't know, maybe I could do it. I could get up to speed with it, but I'm not going to sit here and say like, oh, that's just like whatever. Anybody can walk in off the street and do student affairs. Not so. Okay, it takes a certain touch and training. Open dialogue, having a supervisor who isn't flighty. I haven't heard the word flighty in like a long time. I grew up in the South, and that's a word that gets used a lot. So I appreciate that. Flashback. Yeah, so you feel safe, right? I mean, that's what, if you walk into work every day and you feel like you could make an honest mistake and just get crushed by, publicly humiliated by the person who's above you or beside you, I mean, how is that safe? You might as well be not physically safe, like walking through a physical minefield or one of those Indiana Jones style trap things where something could shoot out and, you know, get a poison arrow in the chest at any moment. Yeah, these are all good words to describe psychological safety. Okay, all good cultures promote psychological safety in deeds, not just words. It's a priority. Okay, and you feel it when you're there, and you definitely feel it when it's not happening. So that's one aspect of culture that is omnipresent in all positive cultures that we see. Okay. Another one is related to this one, and it is the concept of vulnerability. Okay? This is a state of being exposed to the possibility of harm. Okay, exposed to the possibility of harm. That's what vulnerability is. You're putting yourself out there, and you could get hurt. Okay, that's what vulnerability is. It has to do with how willing we are to signal our own insufficiencies, okay, and share those insufficiencies with others. Okay. In a positive culture, there's, and sharing risk, this is something you all brought up on the Menti screen. Okay. In a positive culture, there's a feedback loop that takes shape when vulnerability is normalized. Okay. You have a person on the left here who needs help. Okay. This could be anybody on any given day. Some people say it, some people don't. Okay. In a positive culture, people who need help say that they need help, but it's not just saying that they need help. Other people in the organization pick up on that signal, and they signal back that, hey, I need help too. And maybe not in the same way, but in other ways. So maybe we can help each other. Okay. The signal for the need for help, the signal that we may be needing something to complete the task or do the thing that we're trying to do here. Maybe it's a training for a particular task. Maybe it's because, something horrible is going on at home and I'm just worn out and tired and I need help. Is a signal. It's not just a flag that goes up. It's a flag that goes up and is responded to by someone else's flag. Okay. And what happens is it creates this loop, the virtuous cycle where people help each other, we connect with each other, and we learn from each other. And it's all catalyzed by feeling like this is normal. Okay. I have this great story about vulnerability while I was at Steelcase, and I just want to communicate it to you with this image here. So one morning we were in this meeting. It was like a design sprint that we were doing in education. A new product was being developed, and I was in on this design session. And Craig Wilson, who sat next to me as well. Craig is the director for Steelcase Education's community outreach. He's a big deal. Okay, he's pretty high up the org chart. I mentioned they had a flat structure, but there's still a structure to it. So Craig is sort of the shepherd / boss of the entire education group on a day-to-day basis. I was sitting there next to Craig and I heard this ping and his phone went off and he had a text message and I saw him look at it, and Craig is he's a guy that doesn't get perturbed very easily, but I saw his face, his eyes get about as big as $50. It's just a total alarm. And he said, "Excuse me, I'll be right back." And he left. I thought, oh man, what's going on? And so when the meeting was over, I heard him talking, and it turns out that one of the company's major clients, it was a college here in Michigan who had purchased over $1 million of furniture and tech for this new interactive classroom. The delivery had been scheduled for that morning. The college had lined up photographers, the local news station to come out and cover the delivery event. You might have seen Steelcase trucks on the road. It's like they're really distinctive, these big blue semi trucks. So they had all this news media out to cover it. It was a big deal, small college, got a big grant to buy the stuff. And the truck rolled up to their building, and inside that truck was this chair and nothing else, a single chair inside the truck. Okay, now they had purchased enough tech and enough furniture to equip an entire normal sized classroom with tables, whiteboards, chairs, projectors, computers, the whole 9 yards, and they got a chair. Okay, so the text message was from the official at this college who was in charge of this, and you can tell he was not happy. You could hear his voice resonating out of the phone from 10 feet away. Now, throughout the rest of the day, Craig and his team were trying to figure out what happened here. And it turns out that Kathy, one of the designers who I worked with, she was the contact person for this college, and she clicked an incorrect box on the delivery form. And so instead of getting the whole shipment, they only got the first item that was listed on the system, on the list, which was on the shipment, which was just this one chair. Now that is a situation for vulnerability. Okay. Now she was out there. My first thought was, he's going to kill her. He's just going to kill her where she stands, just right here. And it's like, we're going to see vulnerability taken to literally a visceral level here. And he could have. Craig could have easily just responded to this with signaling his own strength, like, this isn't my fault, and I'm going to make sure everybody around here knows it. How many of us have been around bosses that are like that? You screw something up. It was a real screw up. I mean, it was like a really bad actual screw up that she did. But he had every right to do so, and all the authority to just absolutely destroy her right there in the middle of the floor and right on the spot. But what he did instead has stuck with me to this day. So he pulled Kathy aside, out of earshot, although I could still hear what was going, and said, it's a mistake. You made it. Let's all work together to fix it. And what he did was he was the person to get on the phone with the college and take the brunt of all the yelling that guy on the other end was putting up with, and cleared his entire schedule for the rest of the work week to fix this and make it right. So Kathy on her end felt safe enough to say, Craig, I think I know what I did wrong. She's saying, like, you don't have to do a manhunt for this. Okay, I can tell you that I messed up. But knowing that in this culture, these huge mistakes, they do have to be fixed. They're real, but we share that risk together and we connect instead of trying to just simply blame the right person and be the right person. Okay. So organizations that have this vulnerability embrace risk rather than avoid it because it's all shared. There's a sense of shared ownership in their work. Okay. So that's something that I will remember for the rest of my days, how that one situation got resolved. Now, what I'd like you to do is I'm actually going to, if I can, put you into some breakout rooms. Can I do that? Yeah, I can do that. I'm the co-host. I'm just going to randomly put you all into breakout rooms here. There's 42 of you here, so I'm going to make, let me dial up, say 11 breakout rooms. I'll put 3 or 4 of you in each. I don't have a poll for this. I just want you to talk about with each other, what was a time when you showed vulnerability at work or you saw somebody else show it? And what happened as a result? Okay. I'm going to give you maybe 2 or 3 minutes just to get with each other, and or let's take 5 minutes because this is a big one here. We're at the halfway mark through here. Let's take 5 minutes and just share some stories with each other about what happened, and we'll come back, and if you feel like sharing with a large group, I'd love to hear it. Okay, so I'll get you into rooms here. I might come around and stick my head into one of these rooms. Otherwise, let's plan on reconvening in 5, maybe a little more than 5 minutes. Oh, I got to click the open all rooms button. There we go.
Oh, okay. I was going to say we're not moving.
I got carried away. I forgot there was another click to do.
Robert, I got nervous for a second because I saw that pop up and I'm like, oh my God, was I supposed to do something?
Oh no, I don't know why I forget to do that from time to time, but I think we're all good now.
Okay, good. Because I thought, wait a minute. Okay, great.
do that. They would have every reason to be bothered. Oh, here we go.
Okay, folks, I think we are slowly blipping back into existence here in our main Brady Bunch room here. I am learning so much from listening to you all talk that I want to just give a few more minutes to let you share out if you feel comfortable with doing so. Any specific examples you have of where you're seeing vulnerability take shape in real life situations and what happened as a result, either positive or negative, and just as you feel comfortable. Just raise your hand, quote unquote, on Zoom, and I'll see it in the participant list and I'll get to you one at a time.
How do you raise it?
I think you do that by going to
Corey.
reactions. There we go. All right,
Corey.
Corey, go ahead.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. So in our group, we talked about a few examples, but I'll give the one that I gave. So essentially, and it kind of came up earlier, when we start some of our staff meetings, I'll typically try to start off with an icebreaker, just kind of make things light before we get into the business of things. So we go through it, and then at the end, always take a few minutes to kind of remind folks to focus on self-care. Taking time for themselves, whether it's with family, with friends, by themselves, whatever that looks like, and just kind of go to their quote happy place, if you will. And so I was sharing with the group that the past couple of weeks have been pretty intense for me, based on conduct, what we're doing with COVID testing, and just kind of getting hit with multiple things, from various areas. And so my vulnerability came out because the staff was then telling me to take time for myself, right? And so kind of going back to that, we're all human, and this situation has affected all of us different, whether professionally, personally, combining of the two. So essentially, some of my staff members were saying, like, it's okay, like you're always there for us, we can be there for you. And so that was really nice to kind of have that reciprocation, if you will, not looking for it, but just to have that and know that, the staff would be supportive as well.
Great, thanks so much for sharing that, Corey. I completely agree with that. Self-care is very important, and the ability to admit that we are also, as human beings, in need of our own self-care is a sign of vulnerability that I think we ought to be reciprocating, right? Does anyone else want to share anything? All right, Carol, go ahead.
I think conceptually, I think that there is an expectation of student affairs people to be strong and to solve problems and to take care of others and to met out discipline or met out the hugs when necessary. And I think that is part of our character, and for all intents and purposes, what we may think our reason for being is. And I think as professionals, there are times when we have to just take a step back and breathe, and let somebody else, especially chief student affairs officers, let somebody else take the reins.
Thanks for sharing that, Carol. That's something as a faculty member, I try to communicate to my students as well, that you're in a class so you can leverage a social network. Okay, do not try to do this necessarily on your own. You're not expected to, lean on each other, because we're a community, right? That's the idea. Scott, you have your hand up. Go ahead, please.
For anybody who knows me knows that there's no way I'm going to keep quiet during a conversation. One of the topics that we discussed within our group was actually about student affairs as a whole instead of an individual level of vulnerability. Our field is all about serving the vulnerable. I think that's a large portion of those who work in student affairs choose student affairs instead of another higher education kind of component or division, because we're so welcoming. It's, you think about those new staff members who come on board, especially years ago when I got into higher ed, it was a safe landing spot for those who couldn't really find a home anywhere else, because we're trained to be welcoming. We're trained to understand the differences and to embrace the differences amongst folks, whether it's something to do with your identity, your background, your ethnicity, as was part of the conversation that we talked about in our group. It really is something that student affairs creates that cloud where it's a safe place to take a leap of faith and to land in. The challenge is that we now create this level of vulnerability and welcoming the vulnerable, and I need to do a better job of really strengthening the folks after they're with us, instead of encouraging that vulnerable behavior because it's nice and very relational, which is what student affairs is, again, what we're all about. So it definitely is something where, like, I needed to share my vulnerability with the group, that I make mistakes daily, I'm sure, if not multiple times a day. But I feel most vulnerable when I have to acknowledge that I didn't do what I needed to do for those who I supervise. They're like, if I drop the ball and someone else has to pick it up, and owning that and apologizing to them for that. So that was, a lot of the conversation within our group. I hope that all made sense.
Scott, thanks so much for sharing that. That's fantastic. Lewis, I'm going to give you the last word on this one, then we're going to talk about some more aspects of culture, but please go ahead, Lewis.
Okay, thank you. This is very engaging conversation for sure, and very helpful. The group that I participated in, we all spoke pretty much the same. It was just the three of us regarding our roles on campus, our leadership roles on campus, and it being okay to not be experts in all fields of which we supervise. Based on longevity, based on experience, it doesn't matter. As long as we're comfortable with recognizing and letting folks know that we're not experts in all areas. And I think we become very vulnerable and we defeat our purpose to manage and lead if we give people the assumption that we have all the answers, when in fact, we have very few answers. And our expertise, my expertise, everyone's expertise on the screen comes from listening to people, allowing people to know and share what they know well. And with that and the open dialogue that comes with that, we all become better. Thus, the vulnerability is either diminished or eliminated completely. I found it very, very beneficial just to step back, engage people who I work with, and allow them to inform me, and I in turn share perspectives with them, and I assume allows them to shine in their given area. So vulnerability is diminished when one listens and hears and gives respect to those who they work with.
Great, that was fantastic. Thanks so much for sharing this, and for all of you. One of the things that I just picked up sticking my head into different breakout rooms is that if you want to see vulnerability, just head over to student affairs, because this is what you do. I mean, you manage vulnerability in some ways, making sure that it's okay, that it's safe to be vulnerable. And if you have an area that you need help in, so do I. Let's work together, let's connect. So I'd like to go back to the slides here and just kind of proceed where we were a second ago. So that was the second aspect that all positive cultures have, right? It was that sense of vulnerability along with a sense of psychological safety. And the third thing that all effective organizational cultures have is a strong sense of purpose. Okay, so strong cultures have clearly defined purpose. They know what they stand for, they know what they're working toward, and the actions of the people in the culture, in the organization, are aligned with your plans, and the plans are aligned with the overall purpose. Now, in higher ed, we're all about writing statements of purpose, right? I mean, everybody has a mission statement. I mean, right? But how many of us can actually articulate what's in your college mission statement? If you asked me to do that, I would be guessing the entire time. I'd probably be right in most of my guesses because I feel like I work at Grand Valley State because we have a shared sense of purpose. But I couldn't actually tell you right now what's in our mission statement with 100% certainty. Okay? How many of us could really do that, right? And if we can't do that, then it's hard to align our decisions and our actions to serve the people we're designed to serve if we don't know what the overall mission is. I think this is where a lot of burnout in higher education is currently coming from, especially among my faculty friends and a lot of staff members as well, that you're doing all this work, you're doing all this stuff, but we don't really know why. Or we have a sense of why, but of my why, but I don't know if that is really the same why as my department or my college or my university. So everything's just misaligned, or we can't be certain about where the alignment is. And that really takes a lot out of you. So a good example, I'm going to step away from Steelcase for a second. I feel like a paid Steelcase advertiser. I swear I'm not on their payroll. But KIPP Academy in Nashville, Tennessee, actually my hometown of Nashville, Tennessee. It's a private school, or it's several private schools actually, but the one is one in Nashville, and they do a good job of this. You can see on their walls they put these little aphorisms about purpose, like work hard, be nice, be honest, no shortcuts. What they put on the faculty walls in their faculty lounge is focus on the student. Google has this phrase, focus on the user. So KIPP Academy and all these great positive workplace cultures have these statements that are like physically attached to the walls, to the mirrors in the bathroom. And it communicates the story and the trajectory of this organization. Daniel Coyle in his book talks about the power of having these little catchphrases and silly little statements that are hanging around. Like I have these in my own classes. The catchphrase for my calculus class is mistakes are data. Mistakes are data. You make a mistake, it's data. Learn from it. Oh, I got the wrong answer on this. Well, mistakes are data. And my students know this and they repeat it back to me. And it tells the story and the purpose of the organization. And it's kind of hard to get away from, honestly, because it's so short and so simple to understand. So I have a question for you about this. What's your purpose? And I mean that both individually and as a group, okay, in where you work. So I'm going to go over to my Menti screen again, if I possibly could. There we go. And on your screen, what's your purpose here? Some people have already answered this, but please go ahead and do that. What's your purpose individually or as a group? You don't have to state which one is which, but I'm curious to know, how would you define the purpose of what you're doing? So serving students, student success, creating comfort and safety, being able to share your ideas no matter what, helping other people. These could all be like little posters that you could just print off or put on an index card and just slap it on the wall and just have it sitting there every time you go to work or every time you go to the bathroom. And don't let yourself get away from it. Helping students learn how to learn. I really like that one. I'm going to highlight that one. That's pretty cool. Students are the reason I do what I do. Serve my organization as needed. Make higher education attainable for students, okay? Helping students achieve their academic dreams while helping them every step of the way. Holistic support, okay? So as you're continuing to add these things in, the reason we have purposes written out, at least the reason I think we're supposed to have them listed out, is not just so we can have them on a website, but so that that can be sort of the North Star of when you have to make difficult decisions and kind of guide yourself through very troubled waters like we are currently in the pandemic, where all the rules have just been completely thrown out the window. You come back to your purpose. You come back to what it is that got you here in the first place and what it is you think you're trying to do with yourself. And your purpose gives you the plan gives you the actions, and the actions guide your day to day. Okay. support, success, helping students figure out who they are. That takes some vulnerability, doesn't it, on the part of the student? And I think it also on the part of the helper. Okay, thanks a lot for that. This is, if you haven't done this activity, I think, you know, it can be a real corny activity if done wrong, right? I mean, we all have these big brainstorming sessions and everyone's kind of rolling their eyes at it, but you know, sitting down and like, no, seriously, what is your purpose? Why are we doing this? What are we doing here? Starting with the why and then working backwards to the what, I think is extremely important. And it might be time for all of us to just do this once. We may have done this once in the past. Just to take 15 minutes to brainstorm it in your own sections, wherever it is you work on the day-to-day. Now, let me go back to the slides again. Here we go. Oh, I put in the wrong slide, hang on. Okay, so I asked you, what was your purpose? There we are. So where are we now? Right now we have talked about these three big ideas about psychological safety, vulnerability, and purpose. These are the three things that all positive cultures, whether they're workplace cultures, home cultures, the culture of your community, the culture of your faith community, if you belong to one, the culture of your friends, all of these things, these interlocking cultures that we belong to, they all coincide in these three areas if they are productive and effective and energizing in our lives. All bad ones lack something in at least one of these three areas. Now, I just want to move ahead here and so say, we in higher ed and student affairs in particular, you can learn from companies whose efforts to build these strong cultures are often, because they're really very public and easy to see. You know, a person who, or a CEO, for example, or manager, will work very hard to build a culture in very public ways and make sure everybody knows what they are doing when they're building this culture. In higher education, it's a little harder to see when cultures are being intentionally built. So we can look at companies like Steelcase or KIPP Academy or a number of different ones and learn from what they're doing. We can learn from those who build the psychological safety, they build vulnerability and have a strong sense of purpose. And you can tell which ones are doing this well because they're the companies that are innovative and agile, okay? That's sort of like the outward facing sign of a strong culture is the ability to innovate and to be agile in what they are doing. Innovation is a word that gets really, really overused in higher education, unfortunately, because it's a very powerful term. It means coming up with something that is not only new, but also surprising and useful. One of the other books that I read, which I highly recommend, is a book called How Google Works, which is written by a couple of former C-suite people at Google. And it's a very interesting look inside. They don't have student affairs at Google, but they do have HR and they do have similar sort of analogous subgroups within Google. And just how that company puts itself together is interesting. It's all about innovation, but coming out of the pandemic, the need for real innovation in all facets of higher education is probably more urgent than it has ever been. You know, people are reevaluating what higher education has to offer them. They're reevaluating the alternatives to higher education, and those are better than ever. My oldest child is 17, and she's going to be out of high school pretty soon. And you know, maybe 10 years ago, it would have been just automatic. You go to college. These days, the alternatives are better than ever. You know, the two-year institutions are really pulling their weight. I mean, they're definitely hitting a niche in a certain way and at a certain volume that I don't think I've ever seen before. But also things that are not even in traditional higher education structures, like coding boot camps or certificate programs or simply learning a skilled trade. I mean, these are all much better than they used to be, even just 5 years ago. And if we in the 2-year and 4-year institution world want to have any sort of relevance in the next few years, we're going to have to innovate in real ways, okay? And just as urgent as innovation is the need to be agile. Agile means in corporate speak, and I don't want to do corporate speak if possible, it means the same thing as in regular English, just the ability to learn and adapt quickly to changing circumstances. Okay, now this is something that the pandemic has definitely forced us to consider. as circumstances evolve over the last year, we have had to adapt and change on a daily basis because we just don't have a playbook for what is going on right now. Okay. Sean Corcoran, who I mentioned earlier as the lead of global lead on product innovation for Steelcase, said this once in a meeting, and it is another one of those things that will always stick with me. Steelcase has a lot of competitors, and some of them are even local here in Western Michigan, like Herman Miller is another name you might have heard of. And he said this once, that the only real competitive advantage we have over anybody else is that we learn faster than anybody else. And that has always stuck with me, especially as someone in higher education, because we are a learning institution in higher education. We're supposed to be a culture that is about learning. And yet sometimes I feel like, at least from the faculty standpoint, we are about everything but learning from things. Like we have like the least interest in learning new things of any organization, any institution on this planet in higher education. And I think that that's a real area of growth for us. Maybe not so much in the student affairs side, because I know the faculty side better than probably anything. Yeah, entrenched is exactly it. And it's getting to be the point where you just can't be entrenched anymore. Okay, I hear a lot of really disturbing talk about, let's save all the new innovations until we're all back to normal. Okay, any organization, any institution, let me just say, that adopts that line is going to be dead in 5 years. Okay, it's just no way that can go on. And I find that to be a very disturbing line to take on things, to just wait to do things until things are back to normal. I don't even know what that means. Now, speaking of innovation, I mean, Steelcase, and in my experience while I was there, is nothing if not innovative and agile. I had this one experience, just to give you a sense of how fast things can move. I had this one experience where in one of the Monday meetings, one of us, it wasn't me, it was somebody else, came up with like this idea that they had heard a customer maybe say, this would be kind of cool if you guys made something like this. And they said, well, here's what this customer said to me. It went from idea to on the drawing board in a week. Okay, the designers had roughed out a computer model for what the customer wanted. It went from idea to drawing board to prototype, actual physical prototype, in another week. It was being manufactured in 2 more weeks. And in 2 more weeks after that, it was on the market. So it went from inside somebody's head to a physical thing that you could buy in 6 weeks. That just blew my mind how fast that moved, because you know how fast things don't move in higher education. I don't know what it's like in the 2-year college world, but in the 4-year college world, it is glacially slow. You can come up with an idea. We've had ideas that are not only good, but we need to get them done. And they have been sitting for 5 years. And I don't know what is going on. Why can't we just get things done? It's because we just have so much of an adaptation toward a bias against getting anything done, it seems like. Good ideas just get stuck, okay? Now, to get things unstuck, at Steelcase, there were also, I see what Carol's going over here, committee work, shared governance. There's a certain sense of, sometimes you got to slow things down to kind of make things right, get it right the first time. But sometimes, I wonder if we could do things a little differently. I just want to mention up in the upper right corner of this are a couple of interesting organizations. At Steelcase, there are these 2 companies that lived within the larger company. I don't know the history if these were just spinoffs or if they were acquisitions or what, but one was called Turnstone and the other was called Coalesce. These were formed as startups with the intent of working on products that might not be successful. Okay, they're sort of like experimental products that the company was interested in, but didn't want to sink a lot of money into something that might not succeed. Okay, it's fair enough. In fact, nobody was actually asking for some of these products. They were just ideas. There was no existing market for some of the things that Turnstone, for example, was going to sell, like this little chair over here in the lower left corner. This is called the buoy because it looks like a buoy. It's just a stool with a little handle on it, and it can rock back and forth so it can move with you as you move. Steelcase felt like there was an unseen market for products like this, which are a little bit off the beaten path, but perhaps, like a co-working space or a startup company wants to have an innovative setup might or might not be interested in. There's an unseen market for it. So rather than invest a lot of money and time into building this product, they spun the whole project off into Turnstone. Turnstone was given some control and a little bit of money. So if they make the buoy and the product fails, they would just shut everything down and they wouldn't have lost a lot of money. But it turns out that the buoy became one of the most popular products that Steelcase sells these days, and everybody wants one, especially in K-12 classrooms. You can see little kids sitting on these. So it took that innovator's mindset to just try something new and keep things limited, keep the cost and the scope limited, but just try it. Be vulnerable as an organization, not just individually, but corporately, literally corporately as an organization, and just take a few risks, get a good idea out there quickly, and iterate on it with customer feedback. Okay, that's how innovation works. Is we just get ideas out there. They may not be perfect. They may not be even ready for prime time consumption, but you get it out there. You listen to the people you serve. You come back. You iterate. You get it back out there. You listen some more, and repeat this process until you have something successful. So that's what Turnstone and Coalesce do. It's that solution to what is called the innovator's dilemma. That's a famous book, another book that I read while I was on sabbatical, about how to build into markets that are just beginning to emerge. And we are all, despite the sort of corporate speak that you might be hearing me say, we are all in an existing market that nobody really knows what the rules are anymore. So let me ask you this question here. I'm going to go one more polling question. What are some ways that student affairs will need to innovate and be agile? I feel like we're kind of beginning. I don't want to jinx this, but I've got my first vaccination round. Thank you very much. That was a nice thing to have happen. As we begin to exit the pandemic, how are we going to be agile and innovative? Whether I'm going to ask you in particular as student affairs people about that, because I'm interested to hear what you have to say. So last Mentimeter poll for the day, what are some ways that student affairs will need to innovate and be agile as we start to emerge from this pandemic? Love to hear what you have to say on that. We talk a lot about this on the faculty academic side of higher education. And what are we going to do to innovate? What are we going to do to be agile? A lot of people don't want to talk about this because they don't want to, frankly, necessarily do anything that's been different than what we've always done, but we have to. Okay, long distances, that's something that faculty are having to think about too as we design courses. Reaching out over long distances. Yeah, that's an interesting problem for student affairs, how to engage students remotely. Meeting students where they are, like literally geographically where they are, and also emotionally, financially where they are. I can see that. Better hiring and evaluation practices. That's really interesting too. That impacts students as well, because students, make up a large portion of the academic workforce, it turns out. More workplace flexibility. Now that's an interesting thing as well in terms of working remotely. I think we're probably all, or most of us are working remotely right now. How and whether that's going to continue is sort of an open question right now. So some people will want to remain remote. Some people will want to be back in an office. And when you do, you got to be socially distanced. This is a question that Steelcase is grappling with right now. Oh, I love the reference of universal design. Okay, universal design, that's a whole nother 2-hour rant I could give here about universal design. I think with remote learning ramping up as it is, it's not going to go away entirely. And meeting students where they are, I think that's what universal design is really all about. I love the fact that student affairs people are thinking about this. I wish more faculty would too. Being prepared for the trauma we've all experienced. We've all experienced some form of trauma, some way more than others, and all of us in different degrees and in different kinds of things that we've experienced. And how do we deal with each other once we're back, if we are back in a physical office space? That's innovation too. I mean, we have to come up with something that is not just the ordinary, because we didn't used to have to deal with this stuff. Now we do. Listening to students. That's a crazy idea, listening to students. I'm going to throw that one out immediately. No, that's obviously neither crazy nor is it anywhere but number one on the list as far as I'm concerned. Everyone's experiencing it differently. How do they meet their unique needs? Delivery of services, work schedules, flexibility. Yeah, this is all really interesting stuff, and I totally agree. The entire rules of how we work together, no matter what it is we work on, have been completely rewritten. The code is completely rewritten, refactored for post-COVID, if there is really any such thing as post-COVID. And students are experiencing the same thing. So that's a form of innovation and agility that has to be dealt with, okay, as things keep changing. Making programming accessible, getting away from all in-person time structured activities. Yeah, that could be something I could just shoot directly to the academic affairs side of the house. You know, I wrote a blog post recently about assumptions that have been crushed by COVID, and one of them was the assumption that we can assess students in person on demand. Okay, we'll never be able to do that again. Okay, so we got to change the way that we test students and think about how we evaluate their learning. And that's something that impinges directly upon, I think, what y'all do. Yeah, interdisciplinary programs, yeah, just simply bringing these different sides of the house together, I think, in a way that, you know, that makes sense, that shows that we're not different sides of the house. We're all living in the same house, and so are the students. Well, please put up some more. I'm just saving this stuff because I'm learning a lot right now just by reading this. Okay, so let me kind of begin to wrap up here as we're heading in towards the 2 o'clock time here. Let me get to the right slide. And with a little epilogue here. Okay. So what we've learned over the last hour and 30 minutes is that culture is what makes or breaks the student experience, and it makes or breaks our experience. I gave a little joke earlier that people don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad managers. That's certainly true, but I think it's more true and less funny that people leave bad cultures, right? You get into it, or they should leave bad cultures. We shouldn't expect people to stay inside toxic cultures that don't promote their growth and their happiness. Let me tell one more story here, and then we'll be close to done here. So during the secret sabbatical, what I should say, in the elements of those cultures are psychological safety, vulnerability, and a strong sense of purpose. And all three of those fit together to promote a very fertile place where innovation and agility take place. And it's very hard for real innovation and real agility to take place absent all three of those aspects of a strong culture. Good companies have it, bad ones don't. You can study the good companies and just copy what they do, and in some ways adapt it to what higher education uniquely does. We don't have to become a company to be like one, okay? You can take the good stuff from what you see and just make it work where you are, okay? And that's the challenge. Now, speaking of challenges, let me just tell one more story here. So during the secret sabbatical, that as I was coming to the end of that sabbatical year, I decided that, based on all what I'm learning, I think I'd like to start stepping into some leadership positions back at GVSU. It's something I wanted to pursue. So while I was still at Steelcase, I ran for and was elected assistant chair of my department. There are 2 assistant chairs in my department. It's an open slot for the next academic year. So I got the chance to put all this stuff into practice as an assistant chair during the 2018 to 2019 academic year. Little did I know just how much that was going to be put into practice. So the assistant chairs do a lot of sort of manual grunt work, like scheduling courses and chairing search committees and things like that. During the summer of 2019, following my first year of a 3-year term as assistant chair, my department chair unfortunately had some significant unexpected issues with her health and with her family. And she was already close to retirement. So she just decided to just go ahead and retire on the spot with very, very little warning for us. Not her fault. I would have done the same thing in her situation. But after 1 year as assistant chair, I got picked to be put into the department chair position. I had no onboarding. I had no training. There was no instructional manual, and I had just 1 year of experience. In fact, I only had a half year of experience, it turns out, because in the spring semester of 2019, I had to take the entire semester off to have heart surgery. So I was out on FMLA leave the entire year, practically. So with just a few months under my belt as assistant chair, I was suddenly in charge of a department of 40 faculty, 300 majors, 3,000 students taking math courses at any given time, and nothing to prepare me for it. Okay, so the department on their side too had never experienced anything like this before. An experienced sort of legendary department chair suddenly stepping down, leaving kind of a vacuum in her place, because she was one of the few people in the department that really knew how to run anything. It was such a complicated organization, it still is, and a complete new person taking over with zero experience. So it really just fell to me in the right place at the right time to put what I learned about all this culture stuff into practice in the fall of 2019 and make sure that the transition didn't wipe us out, and that all the things that were supposed to happen in terms of merit review, faculty raises, promotion and tenure, all that stuff that I was in charge of went off without a hitch. And we did pretty well, okay? But that was the fall of 2019, and you know what's coming, okay? If it's the fall of 2019, November 2019, we started hearing some stuff about this weird disease in China that was beginning to spread out of control. You know, by January, there were some inklings that, you know, this thing, what is it, COVID-19? Yeah, something COVID, whatever. This could potentially be somewhat disruptive. It might even affect the way that we run our classes. We don't know. Probably not, but, you know. By February, you know, people were starting, some universities like Stanford were beginning to shut down. And almost 1 year ago to this day, this is March 18th, on March 16th of 2020, Grand Valley State closed its campus and put everything online. I will remember the week before that closure forever, because I was department chair. Everything was going out the window in terms of the rules of engagement, and everybody was looking at me going like, what are we going to do? So it fell to me to make all this stuff work. We had 40 faculty, 3,000 students, 300 majors, 100 sections of math classes, only about 3 of which were optimized for online delivery, and we had to make it work in 10 days. We did really well considering, okay? We later gave a survey to our students, and over 70% of the students who took the survey said that they were either satisfied or highly satisfied with the experience they had during that last half of winter semester of 2020. Now, our faculty were on the edge of just completely losing it a lot of the time, but we eventually made it work by building culture within the math department. So I learned to provide psychological safety to our faculty members, to my colleagues who were struggling greatly with this. These are like superstar math professors who were emailing me saying, I don't think I can carry on any longer. And I was really worried about this, but we learned to provide two-way lines of communication where they could tell me anything and I would try to act on it. No judgment. We had weekly check-ins on Flipgrid with videos so we could see each other. We started a Slack workspace where we could share concerns and ideas and build that vulnerability loop that I mentioned earlier. I regularly communicated to them like simple little aphorisms about our purpose, like focus on the students, okay? Focus on the students, just stay focused on the students. And it became kind of like this catchphrase that guided us through this. Okay? Now, I'm not going to say that I single-handedly saved the day like I'm some sort of superhero. I'm not. But what I did learn in those months at Steelcase became useful for me in ways that I could not possibly have imagined back in 2017 when I was just showing up as an intern on day one of the job. And it just really convinced me that if higher education wants to have a vital and relevant and attractive future, then it can absolutely have one if and only if we focus on building a culture that helps all of us belong, all of us drive toward innovation, and all of us just stay agile, stay focused, and adapt to what's coming. Here in higher education, whether you're student affairs or you're a library faculty or you're a regular teaching faculty or a dean or whatever, we're all learners, and we need to have a culture that builds on that great tradition of learning and moves it forward post-pandemic. So that's it for me. I want to thank you again for all of your attention, all of your work, and all of your ideas. Like I said, it's a real privilege to be able to talk to student affairs people and just see what you do, hear from it firsthand. I want to just say I'm open for if you want to shoot me an email about anything, request, a thought, or questions, anything you have. You can contact me at that email address. I write on a blog at rtalbert.org twice a week about various things. If you want to learn more about my sabbatical, I have a little subpage about that. It includes a link to the paper I wrote on Learning Spaces. And I mentioned my book on flipped learning a little earlier. And if you want to know more about that or order yourself a copy, you can go to rtalbert.org/book. Okay. Listen, stay strong and stay healthy and stay with each other. Okay. You're doing great work and it's a privilege to be with you today. And I want to thank Carol and the whole team for inviting me in once again. Thanks. And I hope you have a fantastic day.
Well, we want to thank you, Robert, for spending some time with us. I think one of the things about people in student affairs is that we try to pride ourselves on being innovative and agile within an environment that, like I put out there, is very entrenched, is very hierarchical, because we understand that when students come to us, you know, we need to meet them where they are. And if we're not agile or innovative, from making sure that somebody comes to programming, or how do we convince, you know, students that this is the right option for you, we have to be very flexible and quick in terms of how we deal with things. But I certainly appreciate, you know, you spending some time. Is there anybody who wants to give a final thought? I know that we were going to shut it down at about 2 o'clock. Is there anybody who wants to share anything before we let Dr. Robert go? We don't have any news? All right. All right. Well, we really appreciate your time. I will be in touch with you. I sent you, some follow-up paperwork. I'd like to share with all of the student affairs folks, our next series will be in March, April. So please look out for that. We hope that you enjoyed our kickoff. We wanted to make it a macro picture about student affairs. Never forget why we're here. Students are the reason why we serve. And I thank everybody for taking the time out on a Friday afternoon to spend a little time. Have a great day. Have a great afternoon. Have a great weekend. Happy spring. Spring starts tomorrow. Thanks, Robert.